Obviously, it's very difficult to be following Melissa Harris Perry. And I would blame the person who came up with the schedule, but I'm that person, so, there's nothing I can do except, admit that I'm no Melissa Harris Perry. But we do have a phenomenal panel to really build upon some of the things she opened up. I mean, I think Melissa really pushed the level of intersectionality that's really needed to do this kind of work. And we've made sure that this panel, made up of philanthropic, community organizing, and civil rights leaders, really talk to us about how And Still I Rise and Black Workers Matter and the issues that we talked about in terms of black workers really resonates in their spheres of work and influence. And how, because the work that we're talking about cannot be done alone. And so many issues, I think, as P.D. Talley talked about, so many issues that people sometimes traditionally don't think have anything to do with black workers, like campaign finance or, things that aren't like get out the vote, the obvious get out the vote issues, ballot initiatives, but those things do. And having this wonderful panel really take a step back and look at how all of the issues we've discussed today relate to black workers mattering and black lives mattering is really important. So I'm so excited to have this panel. We're going to try to, in order to try to stay a little bit closer to time, since we lost a few minutes, we're going to try to be brief in introductions, but we still want to give people an incredibly rich conversation today. So let me introduce our panelists. We have Luz Vega-Marquis, who is president and CEO of the Marguerite Casey Foundation, where she oversees the foundation's $700 million endowment and $35 million grant-making budget. Ms. Vega-Marquis was positioned at the foundation just a few years ago, and she is really focused on movement building and shaping the grant-making strategies going forward to support a nationwide movement of low-income families. So we're amazingly excited to have her here, coming all the way from Seattle. Deepak Bhargava has, for the last 13 years, served as the executive director of the Center for Community Change, a social justice organization that empowers low-income people and people of color. He joined CCC in 1994. Actually, Deepak and I worked together at Acorn in 1993, 1994, just as a personal note, serving as the director of public policy before becoming the executive director in 2002. Many of the people in this room participated in a phenomenal conference that Deepak put together in Washington, D.C. just a couple of days ago, and I hope he has an opportunity to talk about that and its interconnection to the phenomenal work that we're talking about today. And finally, we have Peter Williams. Peter Williams is the Executive Vice President for Programs for the NAACP. Peter has a solid experience of leading organizations, managing staff, and developing and implementing programs, creating strategic alliances, and conducting policy research work. Before coming to the NAACP, Mr. Williams was the principal at PW Consulting Group, a policy research and management consulting firm. So we are amazingly excited to have a perspective from civil rights leaders, community organizing, and philanthropic constituencies talking about the importance of this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luz.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to tell you something. I see that we lost like half the room. So now when your colleagues come back in the room, you tell them you all got a grant from me.
Should have been here. You snooze, you lose.
Yeah. But on the serious side, I want to tell you how much I enjoy being here with all of you. And there's a couple of the Marguerite Casey Foundation grantees in the room. But what I'm here is because I want to tell you as quickly as I can about the importance of the work of the Marguerite Casey Foundation. Does it sound like I'm touting my own horn? I am. Because I think it's important we understand of the work that we're doing. First, we got started in 2001, so brand new foundation with an amazing board of directors headed by Freeman Rabowski, the president of UMBC. And a very traditional board, but they had accepted an agenda, a strategy that is totally revolutionary. And it's revolutionary because it says that it wants to help build a movement of low-income families, and this is the catch, by providing long-term general support to organizations. Okay? Secondly, we don't tell organizations what to do. If you're doing work in the South, organizing child care workers, that's what we support. We don't tell you we want you to do that. That's what we support with the general support. And third, and this has been the most difficult part, is we brought disparate people together in different regions of the country. So in the states in the Deep South, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and I missed Georgia, Florida. I may have missed one. We're working with folks there at the grassroots level, providing now after 12 years significant infrastructure for movement building. And how we support movement building, I want to be clear. Not only do we fight poverty, we apply a racial lens to everything that we do. We stay true to our brand promise. We ask, we listen, we act. This is what we work with our grantees. We try to help build their infrastructure. And we help empower low-income families. We want to make sure that at the end of whatever the last mile is, that we end up with an empowered constituency of low-income families that recognize their own value, their own political value, but that collectively is the only way by which we're going to achieve that political power. So to us, that is really important. So how we support movement building, first of all, we build collective, we help build the infrastructure. Secondly, we look at the leadership development, not only of organizations, but the local leaders. That's very important to the work that we do. Third, we look at policy wins. Most of our grantees are not into services, but they are into advocacy and activism. Fourth, we look at network building. So we have, across the 13 states where we fund, we also created a position called the network weaver. Because we were bringing connected but disparate groups together, we created this position of a network weaver that helps to knit and to build the networks in those different areas. And it's been really remarkable. Gloria Walton from Scope is here, and she's part of the network in Southern California that they've been so instrumental in the passage of Prop 30 and Prop 47 in California. Significant victories for low-income people in that state. And finally, we also want to talk about the involvement and the engagement of families in creating policies and being able to advocate for themselves. So that's what we do. I think that, do you want me to talk about what I see philanthropy doing for? I think that we have some tremendous opportunities at this moment in our history when we look at what philanthropy can do to help connect a Black workers movement with other movements, but how to also nurture it and help keep it strong, make it strong. One of those things is, I think that the Executive Alliance, the group of about 40 foundations that are working on issues of Black men and boys, I think is an important infrastructure to which to connect these issues. I think that we need to figure out what is the intersection and how do we have the conversation with that group of foundations. Secondly, I think that there is an amazing opportunity to change the narrative and to use the resources of foundations to disseminate all this information that's gathered here and how we can grow this knowledge and infrastructure for Black workers. I think that's really important. And finally, I think it's really figuring out what are those friendly foundations first so we can go and get those grants to continue to build the movement. I think also for me is important that we start by doing a landscape analysis. Where are we? Because it seems to me that what I hear oftentimes is we're so disconnected. And so we need to figure out who gathers all this information and keep us all informed so we can move with better, at a quicker pace and also we don't repeat mistakes, and we don't recreate the wheel every time. So, thank you.
Deepak?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Happy May Day. What a great place to be on May Day. So I was asked to do a little bit of reflection about the reports that were prepared in advance of this conference. I did want to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, Luz is an incredible philanthropic leader who has lived these values for a very long time. I wanted to lift that up. And I'm on the board of the Discount Foundation, and I know Dorian gave you a shout out earlier, but I did want to say Susan has just been a ferocious advocate of this work, and I really want to thank her and honor her for her leadership. So I thought the reports were extraordinary, and usually I have a lot of critique to offer. I could critique a cereal box in the morning, but I don't have a lot of critique to offer about the reports. I guess, want to tease out some questions that they raised for me, maybe to spark a little bit of conversation. So it seems to me that kind of one of the core arguments of this report is that it has been very difficult to name building black infrastructure and to get it funded, and that the intersection, like it's kind of hard enough to get anything funded about race, and it's hard enough to get anything funded about organizing. Put black and organizing together, and it gets exponentially harder. I think that's really deeply true. I feel like the emerging energy and movement around a black workers movement, around Black Lives Matter, present a real opportunity to begin to change that paradigm, and at least to begin to struggle against it, so Luz has more, allies in the world of philanthropy. I do think that there's an underlying thing going on here too, which is that, the general acceptance of the kind of movement building theory that underlies the reports and the work, it's just not there. And I was reflecting, a good friend of mine, a colleague, a mentor, passed recently, Jean Hardesty, and she and I wrote an article 10 years ago which basically tried to argue against the notion that you fund a few think tanks, you start change top down, you start with the lowest common denominator. You guys know the story. You don't talk about race or gender, and that's a winning recipe. How's that worked out for us? And that's still the dominant view, that change happens through elites, change happens through centralized structures and under unified command. So I do think there's a real dilemma about how to do that. So I offer that as a question, that I think there's an opportunity, because of the remarkable energy and the work of people in this room and beyond, to begin to change that conversation. I think it runs up against some very deep cultural grains in philanthropy and just in how this society is organized. The second thought I had is, as we deepened our work in economic justice and economic equity, one very striking thing to me has been a disconnect between the institutions and groups working on the inequality issue, which is really surging in public consciousness, and issues and groups working on issues of racial justice, gender justice, immigrant rights, et cetera. It's like Mars and Venus in terms of the recognition that the work on issues of race is actually work about economic justice. It's a very strange disconnect, but you can go into conferences and never hear anything about women of color, men of color, anybody of color. It's a very weird conversation. And so I think the work around building an independent black-led organizations of black workers could be a very transformational kind of intervention in this moment, where there is this consciousness that we have this yawning chasm, but in a way there's kind of a lack of enough presence. So that's another question that was kind of ringing around my head about how to connect these dots. And the last thing that I was really struck by in the reports that I wanted to start with was there was interesting discussion from the interviewees about what were and weren't the lessons from the immigrant rights movement for this emerging movement of black workers, and was interesting to me is, of course, having been involved in that movement for 15 years, the paradigm has been the Black freedom struggle, and the conversation is, well, what's relevant and what's not relevant? And I guess my basic conclusion about it is, I don't think it's worth a lot of, I don't think it's appropriate to think there's such different struggles that I'm not sure it provides much of a template, except perhaps in this regard, which is the notion of an agreed upon North Star, a kind of sense of what was the destination, which is so common to social movements, like what's freedom, what is the place we're going, even if it's 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. That does provide a kind of connective tissue even when we're fighting with each other. We're agreed upon a goal, but we get there in different ways. And so I wanted to reflect back that I think in this movement, as it develops and grows and finds its voice, I think that's a question we're thinking about. And hopefully in the Q&A we can talk a little bit about some of the work that Dorian's done with us to try and articulate some ideas about solutions to the substantive issues that were raised. But I'll stop there for now.
Excellent. And Peter?
Yes. Marc, first of all, thank you, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about such important work. And I'm excited because I started in '85 and '83 when I was in grad school. My first sort of activist moment was the Free South Africa movement. Then when I came back here to New York, I was involved in organizing with Kevin Powell, Sister Soldier, after Howard Beach. And I was involved in trying to deal with police brutality and racial violence in the city. But my background is in community development. I ran the CDC here. I was the head of housing community development for the National Urban League. So I'm like, okay, where is the issues around economic justice in this city? So we started coming together, a bunch of us, and thinking about it. And I was a good friend of mine, the late Walter Stafford, a Black labor economist here, my mentor. And he did some reports. So I Googled him the other day. And I came up with a January 31st, 1988 article in the New York Times. Minority groups are urged to focus on economic issues. Actually, it was a day-long conference I organized because I wanted to develop an independent Black budget agenda for African Americans, Asians, and Latinos. And we're calling ourselves the new majority in this city. But I want to talk about what Walter said, his quote in that article. Walter, an economist with the Community Service Society, a nonprofit social welfare agency, said the city's mostly Black social protest movement right now emphasis is on symbolic protests against racism, adding, nobody's talking about employment. Black and Hispanic people and other minority members are concentrated in certain city agencies and suffer a large discrepancy in salaries with whites. He did a report, right, that showed low salary agencies, high salary agencies. Low salary agencies were all of us. Management was all white. High salary agencies, really white. In the same article, the late Bill Lynch, chief of staff and then borough president, his main guru electorally, politically in this city, said, the opening salvo in an effort to orient the city's social protest movement toward economic issues. We're trying to put the economic issues on the forefront. I was involved in fighting downtown development issues, Atlantic Terminal, Metro Tech. You see, we were finding secondary displacement. People didn't believe in secondary displacement. Now my neighborhood is gentrified. So the economic issues were not on the front burner. We started pushing them, right? Tawana Brawley came, bam. I am all about, I was actually demonstrating. Some people know back in the days, I was at almost every demonstration. Because I understood what it meant to walk in Howard Beach and other communities in the city that folks like me could not walk in and get chased out of those neighborhoods. But I also understood that there was a need for protests around economic issues. I am very happy around the narrative being shifted to income inequality. Because for so long, the narrative has been about the middle class. But it's an incomplete narrative if we do not talk about racial discrimination in the workplace overall. It's the incomplete narrative if we don't deal with what Dr. Austin said in his report. Although the rate of college completion of black students is nearly 4 times what it was in the 70s, the overall relative rate of unemployment of blacks has not significantly changed since then. It is incomplete if we do not deal with another point that Professor Austin made, that percentage of black men employed in good jobs dropped by 9.3% between 1979 and 2008. What that said to me, that was the beginning of the building of the present industrial complex. That was the beginning of the building of mass incarceration. What I liked about the report, you talk about groups dealing with ban the box and those other issues. But Marc, we shouldn't have to have ban the box. We shouldn't have to deal with those issues if we dealt with a true battle for economic justice in this country. The other issue I'd like to lay out that I didn't see talked about much in this report, but I like what Donna Edwards said about in terms of wealth gap. If you recall white wealth, the new perspective, Oliver and Shapiro, well, you know, things are like 50 times worse now. But Donna Edwards said prior to the economic downturn, the wage gap between black and white workers was less in the public sector than in the overall economy. She went on to say these jobs greatly contributed to building of black middle class. If you look in Prince George's County right now, it is upside down. The narrative has to be race discrimination and the wealth gap. That we have to come around these issues and address them from an organizing perspective. At the NAACP, noted in the report, Mississippi, North Carolina, we've been working with labor. We are now in the midst of going from Selma to Washington, D.C. We have the infrastructure, so when we march from Selma to the Georgia line, the Georgia NAACP will pick up. The South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. And the theme is our lives, our votes, our jobs, and our schools matter. We are going to start August 1st to develop an agenda around jobs, around voting, around our lives. And hopefully all of y'all can join us. Thank you very much.
Part of the reason that we brought this panel together is because so many questions come up from so many people in this room and others about how does the Black Workers Matter and Still I Rise work, how does that connect? And I really do want to allow, even though time is short, I do really want to allow people the opportunity to pose some questions about that, because we have a really unique panel who can really speak to different segments of the progressive movement right here. And I'm not saying that they're proxies for the entire progressive movement, but that they can really provide some insights to questions that people have. And I think that with the limited time that we have, I think it's more useful to allow everyone here the opportunity to pose some of those questions about your work and how it relates to philanthropy, about your work and how it relates to larger community change organizations, about your work and how it relates to the civil rights movement. Because I think that those are questions that we spend a lot of time talking about, Well, amongst ourselves, but then we're sometimes a little bit worried to ask those same questions to some of our larger partners because we're slightly worried about the ramifications. But we do have some really good allies here who want to share with you, and I really do want to allow that opportunity for some good Q&A. I see a couple of hands already up, so we're going to pass the mic around.
Hi, good afternoon. Robin Williams. Thank you all for your comments. And Mark, thank you for a great report. My question is, we know what's going on around the country, in Baltimore and Ferguson and South Carolina. President Trumka of the AFL-CIO, when Ferguson happened, when the death of Michael Brown, he went to Missouri and he spoke about it. He was not shy about it. He said that there is a race problem in this country. And he talked about it in a way where there is no real economic justice, and it's systemic. And he got some backlash from some of labor. We have international presidents that want to speak out, but we want to be sensitive to all of our members. So it's been challenging for some of us that do this work every single day. Our presidents want us to do this work, but it's also challenging. How do we raise this issue to a level where it is about jobs, it is about the lack of economic justice in our communities? For instance, in Baltimore, I live in Prince George's County, I'm native Washingtonian. So I've done work in Baltimore, and I knew when the, I would say murder, but that's my privilege to say at this mic. When a murder happened a couple of weeks ago, we knew it was going to blow up in Baltimore, because Baltimore has been suffering for many, many years. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. It was just caught on video this time. So while we're there, we know that in that community, 52% unemployment rate of a majority of probably 92% of African American residents in that community. This is a job that labor should be involved in. It's about a lack of opportunity in the community, and that's the work that we do as labor. How do we raise this issue to a level that if the people in Ferguson or in Baltimore had opportunity to have jobs, they wouldn't, maybe not be seen as a criminal? This is not just about racial justice, but it's about the lack of economic justice in these communities. And as a labor organizer, a labor activist, this is my work. I can't sleep at night. I can't sleep at night unless there is justice in our communities. We fight for justice in our workplace every day, but we'll never get justice in the workplace unless we have real justice in our communities. So how do we raise this issue to a level where all workers understand that unless every community has good jobs and good wages, we will never, never win against the one opposition that we have, and that's big money and big business.
Maybe let's take a couple more questions and then we'll let the panelists try to answer those.
I think that we've lost part of the narrative when we ran away from labor and we allow, I remember back in, I think it was 2003, 2004, when we had the transit strike in this city, right? Nobody stood by the transit workers. That we have to change the narrative that so many people are working out here without any benefits. And so we have to change that benefits, to have benefits, to have the rights, that people have to believe that they have a right. Let's take workers. That workers have a right to, one, a living wage, that working has the rights to benefits, etc. People don't feel, I feel in general, people don't feel protected. And we got to change the narrative out here, first in the communities, to have them emboldened to stand before we start fighting others in terms of within your unions or your corporations, et cetera?
This might be very controversial. I just met the head of the AFL-CIO. But it seems to me that a trait of leadership is to be able to take those hits. Yeah. And how do you convey to your brothers and sisters in the union that it is the African American community that's suffering the most? How hard is that to sell that and to see that? And it seems to me they need to figure out how to fortify your African American workers in the unions to make them stronger and deliver that message. I don't have a problem with that. I've taken many hits over this issue. You know, we fund a lot of African American organizations, even though we don't lead as an African American organization. We see ourselves as a convener of people. And you know, we have an award, and I'm gonna tell you about it because I think it's really important. One of the things we've forgotten, and we forget often in our communities, the African American and the Latino community, we forget that united we could be so much stronger. Yes. We have, yes, and we will be there, I know it. We have a leadership award to leaders and organizations that build bridges between African American and Latino communities, and that has depth in communities, just not the leadership, but also has depth in community. And we give $150,000 a year for that. And we do it and celebrate it in philanthropy, so philanthropic organizations know of the importance of doing this. So I just wanted to say that I hope that you find a way that the unions can support you, your own employer, because if you don't have a backup, that's dangerous.
My name's Denise Perry. I run a project called BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. And one of the things that we're noticing is with the 150 leaders that we work with is the idea of building Black infrastructure, Black power, and Black institutions is super challenged, not just on a general money question, because obviously the field does not have enough resources, but when that money gets passed to white-led organizations to then pass through to us, does not allow us to build Black institutions and Black power for ourselves. And that then doesn't allow us to run the kind of campaigns that we want to run, to pursue the kind of justice that we're looking to pursue. It completely washes and minimizes then the work of Black organizing. And I think the excitement about what's happening with Black Lives Matter is great, but it's leading to a lot of conversations that folks are in and not money that folks need to pay our people who do this work a living wage.
I agree.
Hi, my question or my comment, and hopefully I'd love to hear more from the panel on it, is about something that both Luz and Deepak talked about, which is the long term. And something that I know Marc feels passionately about is this shift that we're seeing, you know, that I think has always been there within the Black community about attacking big structural issues in need of change, like racism. And that how that does not jibe with an Alinsky model that you know is designed to kind of like weed out the things that are harder to tackle, to focus on shorter term, winnable things, and that part of the issue is to create the kind of resources that exist to take on those bigger, harder, structural challenges. So Luz, I commend you and the Marguerite Casey Foundation for taking up that space and allowing, you know, for funding for the long term. Deepak, the initiative that you all are launching is a long-term initiative that you launched this week. NAACP also, you know, longer term, bigger fights. My question is, how can we connect the dots between and among that work to give Robin, to give others the kind of support they need to take it on? It's not just about their leadership seeing it in a different way. The problem often that exists with a number of my clients is they have great ideas, but they don't have agency because they can't get the resources to put behind those ideas. So I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about that.
One thing I wonder about in this particular moment, to Denise's question, because I think it's the right agitation for the philanthropic sector, for the whole field, is there a new constellation of players that should come together and organize in a different way for resources and space in philanthropy? In other words, to Kim's question about there's a disconnect between the talent, the energy, the activism, and the resources available to support and sustain it, not just for a project, for a campaign, but for the long-term endeavor. I think the country's ready for a different kind of convergence. And, I'm certainly open to have the conversation about how to support something like that happening, but I think that's what's needed. I think it's a combination of an infrastructure that can make that claim. It's not just individuals going at trying to sink or swim on their own in a very difficult environment. Combination of support. And I think if there's ever a time to kind of make that play, this is it. So maybe that's a conspiracy that can come out of this conference. I think that'd be a great thing.
I support that. But I think the importance of we have been learning in our work in the Deep South of how to better support African American-led organizations. And maybe my numbers are off, but I would say that maybe 35 to 40% of our grants are going to African American-led organizations. We believe in building that kind of leadership. And we're trying to do that. And sometimes this is a struggle because the organizations are not very strong and it takes a longer time to build capacity. And the challenge there is my impatience because I want to see change yesterday. And I think how do we get there and how do we help? I think it's really, really important. We were in San Francisco with my board of directors recently, and it's dismaying that San Francisco is my hometown and the effect of gentrification. And 2 neighborhoods in the city that had 25% home ownership, African American home ownership, is now 0. Two neighborhoods in the city, 0. And that's dismaying. And those are stories that we need to be telling to others. My hope, it may be misplaced, but it's my hope that the leadership and the talent that we now have, it's amazing. So how do we keep connecting people and where's the money? I'm running out of money because we're trying to give the general support grant, and so that kind of captures our money because we stay with organizations for a long period of time. I mean, long period for me now is 13 years. That's what we're doing because that's how old Marguerite Casey Foundation is. So finding the new resources to do the additional things is a challenge for me. But I'm also very inspired that there's great African American leadership in philanthropy now, to the point that it hasn't been in the past. There's Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation, LaJune Montgomery at the Kellogg Foundation. I mean, these are significant resources. I'm thinking of Fred Blackwell at the San Francisco Foundation, James Head at the East Bay Community Foundation, Bob Ross at the California Endowment. And these are folks who are leading that executive alliance. So it's a great opportunity to figure out how do we connect with them. So the extra money, the things for convening and helping with messaging, I think we need to figure that out. They also think that we need to push foundations to help out with their communications resources. Because I think that's a tremendous resource that we use for ourselves, that we should be using to support our communities.
Let's take a final round of questions, as I'm cognizant of the time, but I think that this is a really great opportunity to actually hear directly from these important folks. So I see Pat's hand over there, and I thought I saw a couple other hands.
Great, thank you. So I want to kind of weave a couple of things together. One is, hearing you talk, and the questions also, I'm thinking, back to when I was at the SNCC 50th anniversary. One of the lessons learned that they shared was, their history of funding and support that quickly diminished when they came out in support of Palestinians, right? And so the conversation that needs to happen around, how even radical or really expressive of our communities we can be when there's funding connected to that, right? So there's that question. But also I would love to pose to the panel to think about, and I'll be using Toni Morrison's quote, a little bit about this, about, her quote about, we'll know that we've received racial equity when we see young white boys killed by the police, right? So how do you know, what will you see in big progressive organizations as an indicator that Black Lives Matter, right? How will that manifest itself, and what are the signs that we'll see in larger progressive organizations that that's actually taking place?
Peace, family. Name's Eric Upchurch from Young Gifted and Black Coalition for the People in Madison, Wisconsin. And I heard someone say something about working together and that being more powerful than these individual battles that are necessary as well, but there's still more power in collaboration. And one thing that I learned just being here is that being in the room with all of these powerful people doing wonderful work, it's inspiring and it's also empowering. And I feel strongly that just needs to keep happening. But I'm wondering if you can speak on what collaboration might look like. I think that a lot of times we have organizations wanting to be at the forefront of an initiative, and that gets in the way, or different egos and patriarchy and different isms. But there's still this need and this acknowledgement. And forgive me if this was already answered. I've been kind of in and out. But it's clear that there's this need for us to work together on a lot of these issues, and in many ways we're doing the same work. So, in your own opinion, what does collaboration look like?
This is something that we've been focusing on at the NAACP, is talking to various partners and identifying what we do well and identifying what the other organization does well, and figuring out how we can work together. And I've had a framework where here's a problem, this is where we can come together and we identify the outcomes that we want jointly. And I've been talking to a lot of national organizations about how do we work together across several issues. And for me, from the NAACP perspective, is that collaboration is something that is needed because we cannot do it alone. And there are other voices that are needed. Let me just, one area that we're focusing on in health, area health. We're starting to work with Latino organizations because we're in the same communities affected by the same issues. And across the board, right now, it is time to put egos aside. For example, in Baltimore right now, we opened up a satellite office to work in the Sandtown area. The Urban League, NAN, and others are all coming together as one to work on the issues in Baltimore. So I think we have a common agenda, and you are very honest about your agenda and what the fit is. And basically, something that you said earlier, that it's not about ego, it's about focusing on the needs of the folks that you want to impact.
At Marguerite Casey Foundation, when we sign up new grantees, we ask for people to be able to work across issues, across race, across culture, across geography, and across egos. It's the only way we're going to get around some of our challenges. Because if we want to lead, then you have to do it alone. I think if you want to work collectively, then we just have to figure out what the collaboration is. And I spoke earlier about the network weaver and the importance of that position in making such a disparate connection between of these different issues and individuals at the table that has been able to bring it together. And in most areas, the thing that brings them together is integrator voter engagement. This is how they figure out if you have education, health, economic development, housing, whatever the issues are, I think they figure out that that's what brings them together, the integrated voter engagement and the values, of course, that drives their work.
I'm just going to take two last hands that were up in this corner, and then we're going to wrap this session up.
Thanks, and I'm going to try to be brief, and I was thinking about how to pose this question in a way that would be productive. And so I'm wondering whether and how the panelists consider the paradox of being in America today. That on one hand, we all speak about a new American majority that is made up of people of color in this country, and we oftentimes actually fail to differentiate the histories of people of color in this country and the acculturation process of the United States of America, which involves being anti-black, I think, in a very fundamental way that we never really talk about. So on one hand, I feel like the alliances are absolutely important, and we have to do that. Too often it's transactional, and it's short-term, and it's not deep. So my question for you all really is, like, what is the actual deeper work that has to be done in the United States so that, and I think it was Deepak who mentioned it, that like explicitly raising funds for black workers or black organizing becomes harder than kind of anything else anyone else has done in this country. And there's a reason for that. There's both kind of a historic reason and a contemporary reason about the narrative of black people in this country, which in some ways is very complex, but in some ways is very reductive to a lot of other people. So I'm just curious about how you balance kind of the paradox of this moment of opportunity about being kind of, you know, a new American majority and the fact that, you know, the acculturation process in the United States, by becoming an American, almost means internalizing racism, in particular against black people. And that gets expressed in very different, subtle and persistent ways across social justice communities. And I feel like we never talk about that, and we never tackle it head on, and we're on the edges of this, and the results of it, you know, are kind of clear in my mind.
It's a really deep question. Couple thoughts about it. One is, you know, there is this kind of magical thinking in some corners of progressive circles that arithmetic is going to result in our liberation, right? That at some point that, you know, you add up Asian Americans, Latinos, and African Americans, and suddenly the sun's going to beam down from on high, and patriarchy and racism will disappear. And so that's not true. And in fact, you can kind of see the beginnings of the possibility of a racial hierarchy being constructed in the United States that perpetuates the subordination of black people, that takes portions of other constituencies. And, you know, whiteness is a fluid concept in American history, right? It is continually under construction. So I don't think demography is destiny at all. I think there is an obligation in the social justice movement, and not just for African Americans to carry it, that understanding of the particular position in a racial hierarchy in the United States that African Americans hold can't just be the business of black people to uphold. I think in the immigrant rights movement, there has been not enough work done, candidly, in that regard. There is more and more happening. Today, I was saying to Luz as I came in, I was actually quite moved that in a number of cities around the country, there is a convergence where immigrant rights organizations are beginning to show up for African American struggles, and that we haven't seen enough of, in my view. So some of it is work within these constituencies that has to be carried by leaders in those constituencies. That's part one. Part two is, I think there's this work that Luz is talking about in places that goes beyond the transactional campaign, which is really where transformation happens of leaders and people and individuals. And then I think the last piece of it is we have to kind of recognize that multiracial alliance presupposes that each of the parts has the capacity to have real standing. Right? So there's all this discussion about tables and states and so forth, and you say, table can't stand up without legs, right? It's got to have all the different pieces be strong. So I think there's a way of articulating a much more sophisticated view of what it means to be doing multiracial work with a much deeper racial analysis that we need to articulate that goes beyond the platitudes of communities of color and new American majority and goes many, many layers deeper than that. And I think we have to push into some uncomfortable territory with each other in order to get there.
You said it well.
So we'll take our very final questions.
Sure. This is Nady Dominguez. I'm the Director of Worker Center Partnerships and Deputy Director of Community Engagement at the AFL-CIO. And, you know, we're very happy to be here and just really happy to be part of the conversation. I guess my question to all of us, to the panel and all of us, I think that going back to the resource question, I think, you know, I understand it very clearly to be in my job, to also, you know, along with Robin and many other women leaders that have been in the labor movement longer than I have, for sure, have made that way for me. You know, Carmen Berkeley, the director of the Civil Rights Department at the AFL-CIO, to really figure out a way to also push our leaders to take more risks. And in that, with that in vain, and I think we're making our way little by little together, I do think that there has been a disconnect between how much importance and resources we put at the national level to do some of this work versus the local level, and how different this work is going to look like geographically, where we go when we think of like the coast, right? We're in New York, I'm from California, but versus what it looks like in the Midwest, in the Deep South, and even in the South, when we think of where we're trying to layer up our resources, we think of the urban cities in the South, but that's not a representation of the South. And, you know, and I'm still learning this myself. I'm sure other people here can add to this, but so the question here is, I know that we are going to have to layer the very limited resources that we have in very strategic ways to move the agenda at the local level. And I think there's been a theme throughout the morning that we can really change some of these things in cities, right? And for our leaders at the AFL-CIO, Tafari, for President Trumka, you know, we have this platform around the country around raising wages and focusing on the ground. And we know we have to push our labor leaders to do that, but we also feel that we need to push each other from the funder side, from the union side, from the limited resources that we have to really think, where can we make that switch, but also not forget the Deep South. And it'll be great to have more voices of Black funders being part of this conversation, especially the ones that come from the South, because Atlanta does not represent the rest of Georgia, right? And as an example, and I think we sometimes forget that. And so I just wanted to put that out there and just really say, you know, how grateful we are to just be here and be supportive in whatever way we can, and that we have a long way to go. And I know it to be my job to continue to push in those directions, but to think about the strategic ways where we can start thinking about layering those limited resources to try to close that gap with many of the people here, like Susan and others that have been trying to do that.
Luz would like to respond to that comment.
I don't know that I want to respond to the comment. I agree with everything you have said, but I wanted to share is that there will be a new resource for organizing in the South, and that is the CERNA Foundation. So they're going to start doing that. How do I know they're going to do that? Because they stole my program officer. We're finding organized my South program office. So, but they're going to start, and that's great news. Wow. That's great news. So be aware and go after them. Don't say I sent you, but.
I think they're here. They probably know.
Well, I want to thank this panel so much for, you know, for being here, because it's really important for our allies to be here with us. Talk about these issues, share their thoughts, provide inside resources and thoughts as to how we need to strategically work together on these issues, because it's very important to have labor partners, to have philanthropic partners, to have civil rights partners, and to have community organization partners with us in this struggle. And I think that I commend them for taking the time to really be in this conversation. Others might have chosen not to be, but they definitely all stepped up and said, yes, we want to be here. And I personally thank them for that effort. Thank you.